subscribe and tap the bell. Twice a day, we bring you the real code of the samurai, not paraphrased, not softened. When Inazo Nitobe listed the virtues of Bushido in order, he placed one first, ahead of courage, ahead of loyalty, ahead of every other quality the samurai class prized. That virtue was rectitude, and the placement wasn't arbitrary. Nitobe considered it the foundation everything else in the code was built on top of. Without it, he argued, courage becomes recklessness, loyalty becomes blind obedience, and honor becomes vanity with nothing solid underneath it. Every other virtue on the list, in other words, is only as trustworthy as the rectitude of the man practicing it. A genuinely benevolent, polite, loyal warrior who lacks rectitude is still, underneath all of that, someone whose good qualities can't be relied on the moment reason and convenience point in different directions. Nitobe defines rectitude in stark, uncompromising terms. Nothing is more loathsome to him, he writes of the samurai, than underhand dealings and crooked undertakings. He then quotes a samurai master's own definition directly. Rectitude is the power of deciding upon a certain course of conduct in accordance with reason, without wavering. Read that definition slowly and carefully, because the emphasis isn't where you'd expect it to land. It doesn't say rectitude is knowing right from wrong. Most people, most of the time, already know that much. It says rectitude is the power to decide, and to hold that decision without wavering once it's made. The failure Bushido was most concerned with wasn't ignorance of the right course. It was knowing the right course and still hesitating, negotiating with yourself, looking for an exception. This is why rectitude sits ahead of courage in Nitobe's ordering, and it's worth understanding exactly why. Courage without rectitude is just the willingness to act, which on its own is morally empty. A man can be extraordinarily brave in service of a cause that's wrong, or in defense of a decision he never should have made in the first place. Bravery answers the question, will you act? Rectitude answers a prior, more important question, have you actually decided correctly what you're acting toward? Bushido demanded the second question be settled first, because courage aimed at the wrong target is worse than no courage at all. It just does the wrong thing more forcefully. This ordering shows up clearly in how samurai were expected to handle situations where the easy path and the right path diverged. A retainer who discovered his own lord had acted dishonorably faced a genuinely difficult test of rectitude. Loyalty pulled one direction, and the uncompromising sense of right and wrong Nitobe describes pulled another. The code didn't pretend this was simple. What it insisted on was that the samurai actually work through the decision using reason, arrive at a conclusion, and then hold to it without the wavering. Nitobe explicitly warns against, rather than simply following whichever impulse felt safer or more comfortable in the moment. The clearest large-scale example of rectitude actually tested under pressure in samurai history is the story of the 47 rōnin, which we'll cover in full in a later video. Men who had to decide, over nearly 2 years of pretending to have abandoned all honor, exactly what their obligation actually required of them, and then hold that decision without wavering until it was finally carried out. That's rectitude scaled up to an entire group of men making the same decision independently and arriving at the same answer, sustained not for an afternoon but for years, in full view of neighbors and rivals who were actively watching for any sign the resolve had cracked. There's a reason Nitobe reaches for the word loathsome rather than something milder like undesirable when describing a samurai's attitude toward crooked dealing. Bushido didn't treat dishonesty as an unfortunate lapse in judgment, excusable given the right circumstances. It treated it as a direct betrayal of what separated a warrior with genuine standing from an ordinary opportunist willing to bend the truth whenever bending it proved convenient. The severity of that language matters a great deal, because it closes off the exact excuse most people reach for the moment their own rectitude actually gets tested, that this particular situation is somehow unusual enough to justify making an exception. Bushido's whole framing denies that exceptions exist for virtue defined as deciding, without wavering. It's also worth noticing what rectitude is not. It isn't stubbornness, and it isn't refusing to update a decision when genuinely new information arrives. Reason, in Nitobe's definition, is doing real work in that phrase, in accordance with reason. A samurai who discovered he'd reasoned badly, on incomplete information, wasn't failing at rectitude by revising his course once he'd actually learned something new. The failure Bushido was guarding against was different, abandoning a correctly reasoned decision not because the facts changed, but because holding it had simply become harder than expected. That distinction, between updating on real evidence and wavering under pressure, is the entire difference between intellectual honesty and the kind of moral collapse Nitobe is warning against, and it's a distinction worth applying carefully before judging yourself either way. What makes rectitude difficult in practice isn't usually identifying right from wrong in the abstract. Most moral questions, examined honestly, aren't actually that mysterious. What makes it difficult is the wavering Nitobe specifically calls out, the pull toward reopening a decision you've already made correctly, simply because holding it has become inconvenient, costly, or unpopular. Bushido's answer wasn't to make that pull disappear. It was to treat wavering itself as the failure worth guarding against, separate from whatever original temptation you're wavering over. Practically, that means the discipline of rectitude looks less like agonizing in the moment of decision, and more like refusing to relitigate a decision you've already reasoned through carefully. Decide once, using reason, without rushing, and then treat the question as closed, the same way a samurai was expected to. Every time you reopen a settled decision looking for an easier answer, you're not exercising careful judgment. You're doing exactly what Nitobe warned makes a samurai loathsome to his own code, trading a course you decided on reason for one you're choosing out of convenience instead. There's a specific test worth applying to your own decisions, borrowed directly from this virtue. When you notice yourself reconsidering something you already settled, ask honestly whether any new fact has actually appeared, or whether the only thing that's changed is how inconvenient the original decision has become to keep. If it's the first, Nitobe's own definition of rectitude tells you to update, because reason demands it. If it's the second, you're not reasoning anymore. You're wavering, and Bushido considered that the exact failure a warrior with real standing could never afford, because a code, a promise, or a decision that only holds until it becomes difficult was never really held at all. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Twice a day, we bring you Bushido straight from the source, the real words of the man who wrote the code down, and the real warriors who lived it.